Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sandwich Commission on Disability meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This meeting will be recorded and provided to the Sandwich Community TV for future viewing. I'd like to call the meeting to, there it is. Today is October 8th at 5 p.m. This is being held remotely in accordance with state laws and regulations, most recently Chapter 2 Acts of 2025 and Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. This will be available on demand on the SCTV website. We will begin with roll call. Meg Keegan, that's me, I'm here. Kelly Trapasso.
Here.
And Joe Saunier is not here. Dom Jellison.
Here.
Joanne Lebers.
Here.
Lisa Judelson.
Here.
Julia Wright. Not here. Chanda DeSanti. Not here. Janine Cohen.
Here.
And Stephanie Latonen. And I don't see her here. So we do have quorum. All right. We can start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Dom, do you have the flag? Yes. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We're going to start with, we put this under correspondence, the open meeting law complaint from Candace Thompson dated September 8, 2025. Acknowledge receipt of complaint, discussion, possible response to complaint. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Randazzo from KP Law Town Council's office. Can you hear me okay? I want to make sure I'm using my Bluetooth. Okay, great. So I probably have seen some of you folks before around town in the past, perhaps most recently with a public records open meeting law training. When, just by way of background, when folks receive a complaint with a board, committee, or commission receives a complaint from someone alleging that the open meeting law has violated, the first step in the process is for the board to have a meeting like this one, board, committee, or commission, and discuss the complaint. And then if the individual complainant is dissatisfied with the board's response, then that individual has the opportunity to then ask the Attorney General's office, the Division of Open Government, to review and make its own assessment of the claims of alleged violations of open meeting law. And so really, this is the first step in the process, the opportunity for the commission to review the allegations of the complaint. And what I typically do, which I find has worked very well, it's the most expeditious for the clients that I work with, is that I do fact gathering in anticipation of this meeting, and I draft up a brief, or sometimes longer, written response that the commission can consider. And if it's in agreement with, or if they want to make any changes, this would be the opportunity to do that. But if the commission agrees with the response, then at the end of our discussion, I would ask that the commission vote to accept the response and authorize me as town council to send it on the commission's behalf, right? And there's really only one main allegation here, and that regards out of meeting or extracurricular communications via text message. As folks know, the open meeting law doesn't allow a quorum of a public body to communicate outside of a meeting, whether it's by in person, by phone, by email, by text, in a manner that is considered to be engaging in deliberation on a matter under the public body's jurisdiction. There are some exceptions, though, and those exceptions are circulation of meeting materials without substantive discussion, scheduling, trying to get a meeting organized or folks available for that at this date and time, and the like. And so this particular complaint refers to a text thread, if you will, or text exchange among commission members, which was acknowledged or referred to at one of the commission meetings. And I had an opportunity to review that text thread, and in my opinion, it really covers those types of topics that are permissible outside of a meeting. Scheduling of meetings, someone's going to be running late, someone's not going to be able to be in attendance. Folks are having problems accessing the meeting. Can you please send me the meeting link, right? Not substantive deliberations or discussions about matters that are either going to be on an agenda, should be on an agenda, or otherwise under the commission's jurisdiction. And so the complaint the complaint response that I've drafted for the commission's consideration tonight really just says that and attaches the thread. Nothing to hide here, folks. And shows that really the use of text, it may be easier for folks than sometimes email, but again, any sort of outside communications beyond a meeting, when they're utilized even properly, as I would say in this instance, folks question whether or not there's something more there to that communication thread. And so, full transparency here, we've attached that thread so that folks can see, in fact, that the communications are within on those permissible topics. And so as a result, in my conclusion, I say I don't believe there's been any open meeting law violation here. Obviously, folks, and I've watched some of your meetings. I've heard the chair say, wait a minute, we can't talk about that or other things because it's not on an agenda. We recognize the open meeting law. I think you folks do take that very seriously, and so I've concluded the draft written response in that fashion. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or wish to discuss any of these issues in more detail?
Was everybody able to access that?
Yes.
I initially had trouble, but I let Michelle know, and someone from her office just re-emailed it to me, and it was fine. I could read it then.
So Michelle, going forward, this is Kelly. If we're having an issue logging on or something, it's okay to shoot a quick text and be like, can someone send the Zoom link, or is
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that's, as we all utilize remote or hybrid technology in the future, I mean, if the text's not working, you're going to need to reach out to someone, and text is usually the quickest. But obviously the caution is, as anybody who went to my training, I think it was last year, heard me say, right? It's on scheduling, technical difficulties. I mean, it's fine for people, whether it's members of the commission or maybe staff, say, hey, wait a minute, we're having a problem with this, with the transmission, give us 5 minutes. Things like that are, really going to be part and parcel, quite frankly, of moving forward in the increased usage of remote technology for meetings. So that's absolutely fine, Kelly.
And I think too, we were trying to access that, and there were some problems with being able to access the meeting link. And so this has to do, when we are the Commission of Disability, and everybody has different disabilities and has different needs. And so sometimes being able to ask for it in that way because they can't access it a different way, it's an accommodation, which has to be done by law.
Right, and I think that's why when I looked at the thread, I said this all seems completely above board and legitimate, right? And as Lisa mentioned a little earlier, she reached out to me. We were able to get her the materials in a fashion that was usable for her with her assistive technology. And I don't think any of the members of the commission should hesitate to make that kind of request, even if it's at a meeting directed to Meg or what. Hey, I need a copy of that document. Something like that. I think that is fine.
Awesome. Does anybody have anything else?
Yeah, I do. It was me opened this whole issue. Does this cost the town a lot of money every time a complaint's lodged against us, Michelle?
Well, I do a lot of these, so all across the state. So, we're pretty familiar, quite frankly, with the Attorney General's position and their determinations. And so I'd like to think that we can do this rather cost effectively. But, it's time is money, money is time. I mean, I'm here. It's gonna, there is a cost associated with that. My goal with folks is to hopefully you don't get many of these, but if any particular board, committee, or commission does, like I like to work with them to get them to a point where they feel comfortable handling these responses on their own, because you don't have to have a lawyer involved, right? The only requirement is that the board, committee, or commission provides some written response to the complaint, depending on how detailed it is. Some folks just feel more comfortable with the lawyers handling it, especially because y'all, have lives outside of your volunteer work on the commission, and so it's probably quicker and easier for me to put it together for
Yeah.
you. But there's a cost associated with it for sure.
Dom, did you have a question?
Yeah. This is just a personal attack, I believe, on the commission, because this is the second complaint from the same person, for no reason. Okay. So I want it on record that's what I believe is happening in case it happens again.
And also, we're a protected class of people, so it's not like I always say, like, we're not the tree committee, right? And so there are protections by law about that. And it can be addressed with the ADA coordinator. I did talk to the previous ADA coordinator about that. So if anybody does have concerns that they're being targeted because of their disability or they're advocating for disabilities, that is something that's protected by law.
Yes, I agree with Dom completely on this, where it's the second complaint made by the same person. It seems like this person is watching our meetings with the implicit purpose of finding open meeting violations and reporting them. And can we make this stop, Michelle?
Well, I want to address that point specifically, Janine, because
Thank you.
you've had 2 complaints now over, I think it's been just about a year.
Yes,
It may seem like a lot, but we have folks that don't even live in Massachusetts anymore. And they watch meetings and they look at agendas for boards and committees all across the state just to file meeting law complaints, and they will say we consider this to be part of our public service, right? We're watchdogs. So I did want to let you know that 2 in a year is not nearly what we see from some of the folks that do make it. It's something that they do, and I'm not being derogatory about it, because folks have a right to file these complaints. But on the whole, this is nothing compared to what I see in other communities. I once had one of my towns call me and say, "Who is this person? How did we get on the list, right? How did we fall under the radar? This person's not a resident, not a taxpayer. We don't know anything about this person, but I knew who this person was because we see complaints from that individual frequently. I have folks down in the Cape area that are, it's one town, it's one day it's one town, one day it's another town. And, again, this is someone's right to do. And I think one of the things that, I don't want to say it's good because nobody likes to have this type of complaint, but one of the things I think this complaint brings forward is that, we all need to be recognize that when you're dealing with persons with disabilities, right, they may need to have, they may need to have different ways and resources to communicate. And so, when I looked at this text thread, I was like, oh, I get it, right? If folks are having problems accessing a meeting with, or needing access to meeting materials, that they may be communicating in a way that's different than a group of in-person, a body that's meeting either entirely or primarily in person with a hard copy paper packet, in front of them and without any need for assistive devices. So, I'm hopeful that one of the things that may come out of this once we send the response out is that, folks don't necessarily jump to conclusions in the first instance that there's an open meeting law violation. But, it's inherent with any type of, as I said, whether it's seeing someone, at a local event, whether it's talking on the phone, email, text, if there's an indication to folks on the outside that a quorum or more of a board, committee, or commission has been having conversations outside, people, may infer from that it's, improper deliberations. And we just, we set them to rights. I think we say here, that wasn't the case here.
I mean, Michelle, this is Kelly. I agree that I think she's targeting with the others, but could she come to us instead of filing like a complaint every time? Like, hey guys, I found this. I'd like to let you know. Or is it just
Absolutely.
process to file a
Absolutely.
complaint? Okay.
Nope. No, I mean, and some folks will, even with the complainants, the folks that file a lot of complaints, there are some communities where I've had them say to me, I know the town manager, so I called him up and I said, hey, wait, what about this, right? That's certainly an option. To, as opposed to going forward with a formal written complaint. But to trigger the mechanism for Attorney General review, they do have to file a complaint, through this process, right? So if someone tried to reach out, didn't get a satisfactory answer, and the time period elapsed through which they could start this process, then they would be out of luck, so to speak. So, some folks may feel that that's, an appropriate, that's the way that they want to have their concerns heard and addressed in a more formal fashion, but there's certainly, there's no prohibition against going through informal channels as well.
Great.
Well, it just feels like harassment of a protected class of people to me.
Well, again, I'm hopeful, Janine, that once the text thread is out there, right, that we'll all be on the same page, that there's nothing to see here, so to speak, in terms of
Right.
the contents. But
Well,
I
I
have
think-
to. Oh, go ahead.
I think
Sorry.
I really think it's not about the open meeting law complaint. I mean, I don't want to spend really a lot of time on this today. I think it's something that we can talk about at a different time, but I mean, people are allowed to say whatever they want here. I'm not going to stop anybody. I mean, she's come to people's work and harassed them. It's been more than just open meeting law complaints. But I guess my question to kind of move us forward is, if people on the Commission of Disability are feeling like they are being harassed, discriminated, whatever word you want to use, because they're on the Commission of Disability and have a disability, what is their avenue to say this is not okay?
Okay.
What
So
is their avenue to speak to that?
I think it depends on what the action that's being complained of, right? I think there can be multiple different avenues, and I don't want to blow this up in any way, but if anybody ever feels in any context that their privacy is being invaded, or their personal space, or that they're being threatened in any way, obviously that's different. Right? That might be, a matter for the police. I'm not suggesting that this is that, right? But, going to the ADA coordinator, or even reporting it to Meg as the chair so that she can address it with the ADA coordinator and or town administration, right? I mean, it really depends on the nature of the issue. I mean, y'all live together, right? I mean, you live in Sandwich. You're bound to see people in the course of everyday life. my hope is that folks are able to resolve conflicts in the first instance individually. So if someone's coming to people's work or, coming to their homes or confronting them, again, I'm not sure that that's happened, but confronting them out in public, I mean, you don't need to engage, right? There's nothing that requires you to do that. If something happens at a meeting, there are mechanisms that we can use to address people who are either speaking out of turn or engaging in disruptive behavior in the meeting. So it really depends on the nature of what the conduct complained of is. But I think there probably are multiple avenues.
So
Uh,
to move this forward, if everybody is cool with that, if anyone here does have an issue or wants to say this, then just feel free to write it to the commission's email, and I'd be happy to coordinate with the ADA coordinator and forward that to him. Because I think that it is worth, if anybody is feeling that this is not okay, you should be able to speak up and say that, and then we can figure out what avenue that is. Does anybody have any issue with that or want to do anything different? Okay. What's our next move, Michelle?
So if folks don't have any changes that they'd like to see made to the draft response, then, and no more questions, it would be appropriate, for the board to consider a motion to adopt the response and authorize me to send it out on the commission's behalf.
Does someone want to so move that?
I'll make a motion that we adopt the response and authorize Michelle Randazzo to move forward on our behalf.
I'll second it.
Let's see, we gotta do, if I, we'll go for a vote. I'm in favor. Kelly?
yes,
Okay. Dom?
Aye,
Joanne?
Aye.
Lisa?
Yes.
Did Julia come? Oh yeah, Julia? You're muted, Julia, if you're trying to talk. There you go. Thank you. Chan is not here. Janine
Yes,
and Stephanie.
I will abstain.
How do you say your last name?
Laytonen.
Thank you. So that passes.
Okay, and you folks will of course get a copy of it, and then, it will be up to the complainant as to whether or not they want to move forward for further review by the Attorney General. So you'll be notified of that as well.
Awesome. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, folks.
Michelle.
thank
Have
you.
a good rest of your meeting. Bye
Thanks.
now.
All right, we're gonna move on to new business, and Jonathan Gale, our accessibility expert, is here. Thank you for everyone from the town that is here to listen. We appreciate your time to come here and do that and your dedication. So I'm gonna turn it over to Jonathan.
Sounds great. Can everyone hear me, I assume?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. First, thank you all for having me. My name is Jonathan Gale, and I'm sort of here. I wear two different hats for the conversation that we're going to have this evening. For general terms, I am the ADA coordinator for my town, the town of Dighton, Massachusetts. And I'm also the principal lead for J. Gale Consulting LLC. And we specialize in disability technology, architecture, design, barriers, etc., things of that nature. I'm not really going to get into that. What I'd like to talk about this evening are what are the responsibilities of the commission, what are the responsibilities of the ADA coordinator, what are the responsibilities of the town. So what I'm going to do is talk for about 15, 20 minutes or so. Hopefully I won't bore anyone. I'll stop at that point, take a handful of questions, and then I'll continue on. And just so that everyone knows, I have couched the things that I'm going to comment on based on the types of conversation that I often have with a lot of cities and towns, a lot of public sector folks and a lot of private sector folks who need this same general information. So let me begin by, first of all, as I said, letting you all know I really appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening. For those of you who don't know, the Americans with Disabilities Act was first formed in 1990 under the first Bush administration. There are 7 primary titles to the act, and they're constantly updated. There are changes. There were changes in 1998, 2010, 2012. Not all the changes that the federal government does get adopted by states, and some states, the changes are actually tougher than the federal government. Massachusetts happens to be a state where the changes are more pronounced than what the federal government requires. So there are 7 different titles. The first 3 titles, and I'm going to go through them all quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because we could really get into the weeds on them, but I'd rather move on to the other things that I discussed. So the first 3 titles of the Americans with Disabilities Act are the primary ones that affect the town. They all have an effect on the town, but the first one is for employment. And when I say employment, I mean employment of people in the public sector. So that would be anyone who works for the town, full-time, part-time, could be a stipend person on a committee or a commission, not necessarily a voluntary person, which many of you are, but certainly a stipend person. And what this particular title is designed for is to protect a person who may or may not have had a disability when they were hired by the town, or may have acquired a disability later once they're employed by the town. And it talks about the non-discrimination components, what the town has to do in order to provide a person with disabilities certain types of technology, perhaps, or equipment, or chairs, or access to lavatories, or sunlight if they need a place where there's light, or a place where it's perhaps more private if they have certain types of disability in which sound bothers them or noise bothers them. It covers a whole variety of types of things, but there's also extensive policy which a town has to create. Every town has to have significant policy that not only covers the hiring and the interviewing process for people with disabilities, but then covers the onboarding process and the evaluative process, because very often a person with a disability has to be evaluated slightly differently. What I'm going to do, though, is explain that with a person with disability, when a person with disability is hired, that person is still expected to be able to perform 100% of the job responsibilities. They may need modifications. Very often those modifications are minimal, but they're still expected to perform the same job duties and responsibilities as they otherwise might have been able to perform. It doesn't mean because you have a disability when you're hired, or because you have a disability that comes later in life, maybe 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years down the road, that you should be given any special deference because of your disability. To the contrary, you're still expected to perform. And I say that because a lot of people who have disability think that, well, I have a disability, I don't have to worry about it. That's not necessarily true. You have to meet the same standards. How you get there, that's a whole different ballgame, and that's another conversation. But just keep in mind that for Title I, employability requires that every town give equal consideration to a person, whether they do or do not have a disability. We all know that sometimes that doesn't occur, but on paper, at least, a town is supposed to give full equal consideration. If the person has the qualifications, they should be considered as well as the person who may not have self-identified with a disability, at least during the employment process. Title II. Title II is really the big one. Title II is about all public services provided by the town. That would be somebody coming in to pay a bill, somebody coming in to have a conversation, somebody needing access to a meeting like you were talking about earlier, and the ways that that's provided. Title II would also incorporate how the town has to have itself accessible for buildings, for facilities, for public access, for different types of meetings that you might have. And that means every building in town, everywhere that there's public access, by the way, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. Title II is going to encompass how you communicate, your digital technology, and that's covered under other acts as well. So anything that you can really think about that involves public access, public sourcing, public integration, that's all covered under Title II. Title II is the big umbrella, and that's what dictates every other title, Titles 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7. Title III is really about public-private partnerships. So if you think, for example, you have a lot of shopping malls or stores or medical facilities in town or other places, that's the public-private relationship. And the goal is to ensure that all of those businesses have public access for people with disabilities. That's a slippery slope, but the responsibility of the town is to ensure, in essence, through the building commissioner and in your case, the Board of Selectmen, is to ensure that private businesses in town make every feasible attempt to provide full public access to any person who has any sort of disability. Now, you know that there are a lot of buildings in your town, just like anywhere else, for example, where there are stairs only, and you may not have full access. That may be okay. And I'll get to that a little bit later when I get into another part of this. There may be buildings that were private buildings where access cannot necessarily be fully provided for a person with a certain type of disability, perhaps wheelchair, for example, or restrooms cannot be enhanced, for example, or larger, or have grab bars or sinks changed to the right heights and so forth. In some cases, that's okay. They depending upon the building and the type of building and the age of the building, those things are grandfathered in. But overall, the private sector has a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility, to make every attempt to make their facility as accessible as possible to the general public. That's usually something that your ADA coordinator or, unless they're one and the same, your building inspector or commissioner would work together on to make sure that it meets both rules. And I'm going to just preface that by saying, and you'll hear me talk about this later, there's a difference between the responsibility of a building commissioner and the responsibility of an ADA coordinator. And I want to be clear, I do not point fingers at any town or anyone, because in many cases, they're one and the same. You'll hear me talk about that later. But the ADA commissioner's responsibility, or the coordinator, whichever they're referred to as, their responsibility is to enforce the ADA code. The response of the building commissioner or building inspector, their responsibility is to enforce the building code. And there are times when they cross. And when they cross, that's when you really need to have people who know what they're doing and understand the rules and the laws in both cases. I don't know Sandwich's situation specifically, so I can't comment on that. I'm just making it clear that it's important, even if it's one and the same person, that they really understand the difference with both types of law and how they can sometimes work against each other and be counterproductive when you're determining accessibility. That doesn't only mean for the private sector, Title III I talked about, that can also go back to Title II and access to public buildings. So I'm going to talk about Title IV a little bit now. Title IV is telecommunications. Title IV really discusses what's the responsibility of the town to have all of your technology, your telephone systems, your emergency preparedness systems fully accessible for people with disability. Do you have IVR systems that have speech compatibility? Do you have access for people who need to do, who are hearing impaired, if they have different ways of having to communicate? Those are the things that have to be taken into account. Is there a digital readout or digital printout on phone services for persons who are deaf? What about digital communication? You were talking about that earlier, for example. And again, we'll get into that later, but digital communication for communicating in your meetings, for the town's communications within departments from one department to another. What about public access to web technology and so forth? All of that comes under Title IV, and the Title IV encompasses a lot of other federal acts. One of the most recent is the 21st Century Communications Act, which is taken up by Title IV, and that talks about digital technology. So it really, it's a wide-ranging flow of what a town has to do to become technologically advanced for people with disabilities. When I say advanced, for example, the town of Sandwich is going to have to be fully compliant for all types of digital technology for people with disabilities by April 26, 27. If towns have over 50,000 residents, they have to be compliant by this coming April. So cities and towns. So you have time yet, but eventually every single thing that you have access to through your public sector, your websites, the way you communicate will have to be 100% accessible. And at this point in time, I don't see that changing. Title V is really miscellaneous, and Title V pulls all of the other titles together and says how they have to be implemented and when they have to be implemented. I'm not going to get into the timelines for that, because there are probably dozens of timelines I could go through as to when certain things have to happen, how far back grandfathering goes, for example, for whether you need a ramp on a building or whether or not you have to have technology access in a building, things like that. But Title V is really the way everything is tied together. type of Title VI requires the town or city to work with the state and the federal government for all of your technical responses. That would be your issues potentially around discrimination, whether or not something is sourced or not, whether or not you have the right technology, whether or not ramps need to be in a building, how the complaint process goes. What if you're filing a civil rights complaint or a complaint with the Justice Department, things like that. Title VI encompasses all the complaint processes and how they have to tie together for all of the other 6 titles of the Disabilities Act. I'm going to skip Title VII right now because I'm going to go back to it in a few minutes. But what I'm going to do is segue, because I want to get to some of the other things and then get to some of your questions too. I'm going to talk about what's the responsibility of an ADA coordinator in town and the town with regard to ADA responsibility. So an ADA coordinator, let's start with that. What's the responsibility of the ADA coordinator? The ADA coordinator in an official capacity for a town can be somebody who is, they should be, in my opinion at least, somebody who has a background in understanding all 7 titles of the ADA Act. However, in many towns, it's a voluntary position. In smaller towns, it can be somebody who's voluntary. It can theoretically be a secretary in the Board of Selectmen's office. It could be a building commissioner, it could be the police chief. It really can, there's no set rule on who it should be, who the coordinator has to be. The Massachusetts Office on Disability will tell you they believe, as I do, it needs to be someone who has a prerequisite and has had training in community monitoring access CAM training or advanced CAM training. It should also be somebody who has a significant background in understanding how to implement all 7 acts of the ADA Act, all 7 titles. And it should be somebody who is somewhat removed from decision-making when it comes to grievances and procedures in town. So those are the first things you want to think about. But that coordinator's responsibility is to make sure that your town is compliant. And you'll hear me say this a few times, it's that person's job. One of their biggest responsibilities is not just to go down and look at sidewalks or have somebody talk to them when there's an issue because of technology not working. Their responsibility is to look at all your town's policies, all your town's procedures, from employment to training to access to physical access to everything that you can think of that a town looks at. What if a person wants to know about transportation issues for persons with disabilities? What if they need to know about housing for persons with disabilities? What if they need to know about education, 504, IEPs, how to work with the school department, things like that? That person actually wears a very, very, very big hat. Their biggest responsibility, more than anything, is to ensure that they're keeping your town compliant or moving forward compliant so that your town doesn't get sued. And that's for any town. It doesn't matter what the town is, what size it is. If somebody files a complaint with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or the Justice Department, and the Justice Department finds that there's just cause, the Justice Department normally takes a very, very hard line when a complaint is screened in. And they will work with the town to develop what's called an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. What happens in many cases is it could have been something that was resolved simply. Maybe it's a ramp, maybe it's technology, and it might have cost zero money, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. If the federal government and the Justice Department get involved, it can cost a town millions of dollars because they're not just going to look at that one issue. They're going to look at compliance throughout the town. So the biggest responsibility that a coordinator has really is to do everything they can to keep a town from getting in trouble in the first place. The scope and the intent of the ADA Act, I've covered a little bit already through the titles and through the responsibility of the coordinator. But the scope and the intent is to make sure that even if your town isn't compliant yet, that the town is doing everything they can to become compliant. As long as you can show and legitimately show that you're taking steps to do what needs to be done to make your town compliant. Are you creating more access points to buildings? Are you creating more curb cuts in places? Are you working with your school department to create access points for parents and families, things like that? Are you working with your highway department, when it comes to snow removal or fire safety, things like that? Are you working with your police department to identify families that have evacuation needs for persons with disabilities? As long as all these things are moving forward, then your town's at least in the right direction. so that if there's ever complaints filed, you want to be able to show that you're doing what you need to do with your due diligence to stay compliant. I've already touched on why your town needs an ADA coordinator, so I'm not going to go through that again. I think my personal opinion, as I said earlier, is the ADA coordinator has to have background, has to have training. There are many towns where the coordinator doesn't have training. I think that even if it's a secretarial person or a support person, there should always be money created in a budget so that that person can receive training they need. They can't get it all at once. I've been doing this for a long, long time. And even I go back and constantly get retrained on procedure and policy and law. So the main responsibility that a coordinator is going to have, as I said, fall to Title 1, 2, and 3. They have to understand the other responsibilities for enforcement. Title 1, that coordinator, again, regardless of what position they hold in town, has to understand how to enforce Title 1, how to review policies and procedures for hiring practices. They may, in some cases, need to be involved in the interview process for hiring practices, or they may need to know how to procure technology or equipment, or change a location for a person who might be hired with a disability, or again, that person later, has a heart condition or a medical condition or a physical condition that requires changing their access point or the way they work or potentially even their hours for accommodation. So the coordinator's responsibility is to work with your town administrator, in your case, for example, or to work with your Board of Selectmen or your HR person to find solutions and accommodate the needs of that person. A lot of the questions that we get often are, what are some of the things that an ADA coordinator has to deal with? You have buildings, you have sidewalks, you have town policies, town procedures. It could be even branches that are precluding a sidewalk. An example, you go down the sidewalk in your town and there's branches sticking out. And if the branches are sticking out too far, they're not just a hindrance to the person with disability, they're a problem for everyone. Could be somebody with a baby carriage. But because they meet a disability standard, you might have to contact your ADA coordinator and have them work with the highway department or whomever to get those things trimmed, unless you are a tree trimming department. Physical access to buildings, they work on that. Could be library access, could be access to Board of Health, could be access to vaccination sites that you have in town. Could be that you have a private business, excuse me, or a nonprofit. I'll just use as an example, Lions Clubs, just to give you an example of something people are familiar with, who want to use town property for an activity or event. It's the coordinator's responsibility to make sure that that particular event meets all the disability standards. Where are they doing it? Are they doing it out into a middle of a field that doesn't allow a person with a disability, i.e. a wheelchair or a walker, access to get out there? That's not acceptable. And it happens, that's very, very common. You'll have organizations that rent town from a space or use a town field, but it doesn't make it accessible to everyone in town to get to. That's not acceptable, and it shouldn't be acceptable. So it's the coordinator's responsibility to try and find a location that's acceptable or to come up with alternatives. The coordinator's responsibility is to look at the school systems, the hallways, the playgrounds, the parking lots, public parking lots. Are there enough spaces in the town? What are the procedures when you go to town hall? Are the windows high enough or low enough for wheelchair access? What about lavatories? Are the lavatories potentially equipped with buttons so that the doors will open automatically? And I'm just touching on a few of the things. These are the physical side of it. The technical side of it behind everything else, that's all policy and procedure. And as a rule, again, the ADA coordinator should be involved in one way or another in every new policy or procedure that a town adopts to ensure that there's language in there. And that's the key factor, that there's language in there that covers a person who has any, and I do mean the word any clearly, type of disability. The language is not rocket science, but most towns do not have that in a lot of their policies and in a lot of their procedures. So when do you have to have an ADA coordinator? The requirements are if a town has 50 or more employees, and an employee can be considered a part-timer. So 2 part-timers do not make 1 employee. 2 part-timers make 2. If a town has 50 or more employees, that a town is required to have an ADA coordinator who is a paid staff person. Now, again, I said the person could be, a police commissioner, building commissioner, or a support person in the Board of Selectmen's office. The key factor is they have to be a paid staff person of the town. Doesn't mean they have to be paid separately. It can be an added duty or responsibility to the work that they're already doing. If the community has under 50 employees, and as we all know in Massachusetts, we have a lot of small towns, especially, when you get into the Berkshires in northern Massachusetts. Those smaller towns do not have to have a paid ADA coordinator. It can be somebody who's voluntary. It can be somebody who's on a small stipend. In my case, I'm the ADA coordinator for the town of Dayton. We have a population of about 8,000 people. I do this for the town as a stipend. That's it. They don't have to have me doing this, except for the fact that they have 50 employees. So technically, my stipend is considered an employee stipend for the town. It's minimal, but I'm considered an employee of the town for the purposes of being the ADA coordinator. I don't know if that makes sense. If not, feel free to ask me questions later. And I'll do my best to clarify that as we go on. I'm going to go through a couple more things, then I'm going to take some questions. Non-discrimination, and what do you have to do for policy and procedure? Every single town has to have non-discrimination policies that are posted, and that's for any type of disability, i.e. the town of Sandwich does not discriminate against. There's specific language that the state and the federal government require, and that information is available through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I'm happy to provide it if you don't have that already. But there's specific types of language you have to have. That language has to be posted in every public building in a public space. So for example, in the lobby, it has to be at eye level so that it can be seen. So not only do you have to have the policy for no discrimination, you also have to have the policy for grievance process. What if I have a grievance against the town of Sandwich? How do I file it? That also has to be published in the same spot alongside of the rest of the policy for non-discrimination for persons with disabilities. It has to have not only the policies, but the contact information, who the responsible party is, telephone number, email address, whatever way that person would be contacted, or ways if there's more than one. That information also has to note that it can be available in Braille, large print, and if that person needs any other type of adaptive technology, or for example, if they're deaf or hard of hearing and they need an interpreter or they need CART services and they want to file a complaint, that has to be provided too. A side note that I think is important here, every single public meeting that your town has, every meeting, anyone has the right to attend that meeting. And this may be something that your town hasn't thought of yet or has, I don't know. If somebody who is hearing impaired wants to attend a meeting, whether it's in person or through a process like this via Zoom, and that person tells you that they need an interpreter or a CART services, or they tell the coordinator, because that's the person they should be going to, the town has a fiduciary responsibility to make that happen. It's expensive. It is not inexpensive. So if we had an interpreter for this meeting right now, we would probably need 2 interpreters because of the length of the time. And that would probably run about $400 to $500. That money should be set aside by your Board of Selectmen, and there should be a fund that they can pull from. So that if a person wants to attend a meeting in person, or the person wants to be online and they don't want to have to use caption services, there's an interpreter. We always recommend that if somebody thinks they're going to want CART services, or they're going to want other interpretive services of any type, even if it's language interpreting, that the policies of the town specify they need to contact the committee and the ADA coordinator at least 10 days in advance, so that there are times to arrange that. Now, if the person doesn't show up for the meeting and you have this scheduled and they haven't canceled, the town is still on the hook for paying the bill. You don't get away from it. You can't bill the person back. Doesn't work that way. But it's a fiduciary responsibility, again, of the town to have the resource to provide it. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts, for example, through the Massachusetts Office of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, provides the interpreters. There are other agencies that provide the linguistic interpreters as well. But you do have a responsibility, if you're asked, to provide them. And if there are large town meetings, for example, and you need to provide CART services as well, and that means so that the information is also projected on a large screen, a large audio screen in print form, then the town also has to pay for CART services. So keep that in mind, because it can be very expensive, and I would encourage you guys as a commission to discuss with your town whether or not there's money set aside for that, because that can happen at any time. I'm going to stop for a couple minutes here and see if anybody has any questions yet, because there's a whole bunch more I want to get to.
What resources did the town have? Because this is a lot of information. What resources do they have to help them move forward if they're not in compliance?
Well, what do you mean by what resources, Meg?
Like
If-
the Massachusetts Office on Disability, like if they have a question, if they
but
are not sure how to do it, who do they
M-
reach out to?
So MOD has a lot of videos, a lot of training videos, and a lot of great guidance on what a town can do to become procedurally correct with almost anything that I'm talking about right now. They also have on the third Friday of the month, they have an Ask the Coordinator session at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, for example. And then there are various people within MOD who are available any time of the month to ask questions and provide separate trainings or training videos, or come down and do trainings for staff, for example, on how to work with people who have varying disabilities when they come into town hall or go to another building in town, things like that. So MOD provides a lot of services and a lot of resources, and I would encourage the town to always avail themselves of them.
They also provide the CAM training, because I'm taking
Yes,
that.
they do. Yes, they provide straight CAM training and then advanced CAM training. That's done by Jeff Dugan.
Mhm.
Any other questions yet? Okay, I'll keep going for a couple minutes. Meg, if anybody shows you that they have a question, just let me know at this point. Okay?
No hands
Um,
yet.
Okay. So the next thing is self-evaluation. Every town is required to have a self-evaluation plan for disabilities. It's supposed to be updated every 3 years. And that goes back to part of what I was talking about earlier with regard to what is a town doing currently to make themselves more accessible? What are the plans for the things that are not accessible? Do you have a capital expense budget for ramps or walkways or park access or new construction or reconstruction in a building, a town owned or operated building? Those are things that you have to think about. Let me just give you a simple example of something so that people understand a little bit of where I'm going with this too. In my own town of Dayton, we recently had our library closed. I, along with others, had to close our town's library because it wasn't accessible. They wanted to take our library and build a new library within it, so it would have expanded it. But in order to do that, there's formulas that we have to use to determine what are we doing with an older property. And this property was 100 years old. We have to look at what's called the assessment card. For those of you who own property, you have an assessment card that tells you what the value of a property is. Once the construction project of renovating that property becomes more than 30% of an assessed value of a property, then they have to basically make the entire property accessible. And that's a simple formula. But in this case, what it meant was that that library that they wanted to redo, the cost of the assessment, for example, was roughly $300,000. What they wanted to do initially was going to be about $200,000 in today's money, and that's 66%. That meant that instead they would have had to make the entire building accessible, which would have cost several $1 million. So had they been able to do part of it for under the $100,000, perhaps, that would have worked, but it would not have been enough to make it accessible by today's standards. So in the end result, we had to recommend the building be closed. We've now, since just as of last week, built a new library in an old building that's fully accessible. But that's just an example.
Dom has a question.
Yep, go ahead.
Now, is there a time period for this? I'm saying,
What do you mean by
Are
a
they-
time period for
are they
what?
allowed to do like a small portion of it now? A year from now, another small portion and continue that? Or-
As long as each separate construction project, and I say that word deliberately, each separate project stays under the assessed value of the building and under that 30% threshold, then most likely they could do one project now and do another project in a couple of years, things like that. But if it's a continuous project, the answer would be no.
Unless they got a variance from.
Exactly, that's what I was gonna say. The other option that they have, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, and I was gonna discuss this later, is they can request a variance with the Architectural Access Board. And in order to do that, you have to explain the history of the building, why you need to request the access differential, what you can do and what you can't do. So as an example, in a building I was recently involved in, they have a public building in a town, they have a stage area. Well, on the side of the stage area, they wanted to build a ramp to the stage. But it's a tight space, and that meant that the turn radius at the top of the ramp would not accommodate a wheelchair in certain positions or certain type of wheelchair. And one of the things that my company did, was filed for a variance. And we filed for the variance because there was the only other way we could have given full access would have been to knock out a wall. And that wasn't possible. It was an outer wall. So we asked for a variance, but in order to do that, we had to provide the original plan, the redesign plan, the measurements, the pictures, everything. Now we got the variance, which was great, but they could have said no. And as a result of them saying yes, we now have a situation where we have people who have access to this stage area for, it's a public building. So now anyone with a disability can use this ramp to have access to this stage area for activities and events. Had they said no, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So that only cost us about $7,000 for this project once it was done to do the ramp, because it was approved this way.
And if the town comes and works together with the Commission on Disability to come up with a plan that they agree on,
Yes,
the Commission on Disability can support the variance to
Yep.
help them get the time that they need, correct?
correct.
Mm.
So one of the things, as I've discussed a lot about what the role of the responsibility of the coordinator is, and keep something in mind: whoever is the coordinator of your town, that person is acting in an official capacity on behalf of the town. Even if they're a volunteer, they are acting in an official capacity of the town. Their responsibility is not to advise the town. Their responsibility is to make sure the town is compliant or becoming compliant or doing everything they can to stay compliant. So they're much more than an advisory capacity. You as the commission are in an advisory capacity. The coordinator is not advisory. The coordinator has a fiduciary responsibility for policy, procedure, and protection. And I want to, just to be clear, there is a difference there. The coordinator's responsibility also is to make sure that they, as the coordinator, make sure that everyone in the town knows who they are, that everyone in the town has the ability to reach them by telephone, by text, by email, and email is a factor, especially when we talk about digital technology. They need to make sure that if a person can't reach them by those methods, or even if there are forms to be filled out, this is a key factor. A lot of people with disability have to fill out forms in a town and they can't access the technology and do things online. Or even if it's just simply somebody going to a town hall to pick up a form and do it by paper. If they can't do it, then it's the coordinator's job to do it for them or with them, or designate somebody to do that. When you do that, one of the things that the coordinator has to be mindful of, in essence, if you think of HIPAA for a person with medical issues or medical concerns, the ADA coordinator has to wear the same hat of responsibility that anyone dealing with HIPAA has to wear. So if Meg has to go to the coordinator because she needs assistance doing something because of her disability, that coordinator has no right, and I want to be very clear about this, they have no right to tell anyone, Meg was there because she couldn't fill this out by herself and I had to help her. Meg needed this and I had to do that because she couldn't do it. Meg needed me to set up A, B, C, D, or E because she couldn't do it. They have to treat that person with a disability with the same privacy respect that person expects from their doctor's office. They can't, unless it's a medical situation that's life-threatening, they can't share any information with anyone. If a town administrator or another official said, I heard Meg came to see you yesterday, what was that all about? They can't share. They have to protect your right to privacy as a person with a disability. If
Do
you
other
come to,
people have to do that too?
I'm sorry?
Do other people have to do that too? So if somebody goes in to fill a form and it's a town employee that's helping them, do they have
Yes.
the same?
Yes, they do. And that's one of the things that if an ADA coordinator is trained properly, or if the ADA coordinator is training people within other departments on policy and procedure for persons with disability, which they should know how to do, by the way. The coordinator should know how to do those trainings. One of the things that they're telling employees of any department, if somebody came to the assessor's department and wants to fill out a waiver request or a request for some kind of assistance for their property tax because they're on low income, for example, and they have disability, or they're a senior and they need help with filling something out, and they go to the assessor's office or they go to the clerk's office, whoever is helping them out should not be discussing with anyone else, even in the clerk's office, what they did and how they did it. Obviously, if there are 3 people working in the office and you may go in there and somebody's helping you privately, the other are going to know what was done. There's no way around that. But at the same time, they shouldn't be talking about you and shouldn't be sharing information about you unless it's necessary to the job itself. Does that answer your question on that?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions so far yet as I continue?
I do have one question. It's Leanne Drake, Director of Community Development.
Yes.
For the notices that are to be posted in every town building, do they have to be posted on certain material? Or, is it a placard, laminate? Is there certain style?
Usually they're posted, they can be done on 8.5, 11 if it's in large enough font. So it may have to be a couple of sheets, below and top of each other, or, 14, I think it's 14 by 12 or something like that. Usually they're done in a 14-inch font. They can be laminated. There's no requirement that says they have to be, but they can be, but they need to be in a spot where somebody at eye level, which is really roughly about 4 feet 8 inches to 5 foot 2 inches, would have a clear sight line of it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I think the main thing that you want to think about as well is that for Title II, effective communications is really important. And this is a big one that every town has to deal with. How does the town get information out to people? What does Title II require for that? Well, Title II requires that there be web access. I've discussed that earlier. Title II requires that if there's not web access, you have a phone there. A lot of towns, for example, establish a phone system. One of the things that we recommend with towns is that when you have people with disability who don't have access or don't know how to use access, or even seniors who don't know how to use access, because that can fall under disability, that those folks can be called and given information. Is it time consuming? Yes. One of the things that you want to remember is that disability, we think of disability as somebody, maybe in my case, who's totally blind, or somebody who's in a wheelchair, or somebody who has a physical condition that we notice. The bottom line is only 20% of the 20% of the entire population, let me put it this way, 20% of the entire population in this country are considered to have disability. Out of that 20%, only 5% are people that have an obvious physical disability, somebody who uses a walker, a cane, a guide dog, things like that. So that means 95% of people with disability, when you're looking at them, you don't know. And I say that all the time when I'm speaking publicly, because I tell people when I'm in a large room, if there's 100 people in there, look around and 20% of you have a disability. But if you don't know who they are, you're never going to know. And you have to keep that in mind, because that means whatever your population of your town is, roughly 20% of your residents could be or may be self-identified, which means that realistically, that ADA coordinator has a huge responsibility. They probably, in some ways, have the largest percentage of population that they have to somehow be able to cater to or provide services and recess and access for. So that means the town has to be able to do that. It doesn't matter if the person has alcoholism, if they were a drug user, a former drug user, if they have other medical condition, physical condition, if they have mental health issues. All of those things are considered disability. A lot of people don't think, for example, of alcoholism or drug abuse as disability, but they are, and they fall into the purview of what an ADA coordinator is supposed to be doing. So an ADA coordinator may be working with your local Department of Health, or working with the police department, or working with your fire department and other organizations and agencies to establish procedures on how a person who has any types of these disability is going to be handled if they're arrested or they're stopped or they're approached. That's a big factor, is making sure that your local police and fire department and your first responders know how to communicate with people who have varying types of disabilities. That's the responsibility of your ADA coordinator, to make sure that they go through the proper training and that the training is kept up to date. So you want to just be aware of that. Anyone has the right anytime, as I said earlier, to request information in alternative formats. It could be on cassette or tape, the old-fashioned way. Some people use Braille, some people need it in large print, some people need to have information read to them. The town has a responsibility to provide it that way. And if I will tell you, one of the biggest complaints that I deal with and I see go to the federal government are towns not providing resource information in alternative formats. And people get fed up with it after a while, and then they start complaining to the state. And if they don't get an answer from the state, they go to the federal government. So if information can't be put in an excessive format, again, that's when we get into having to, contact the person directly, call them on a telephone, have lists, different, your Veterans Affairs Department, for example, very often has lists of veterans with disabilities. Your Board of Health may have people list of persons who are self-identified with different types of disability. Your Council on Aging, same thing. Your police department, in some cases, or your fire department may have lists of residents with disability in
The
case of
fire
evacuation
department.
emergency.
The fire department does.
They do, and probably some of the others do too. So one of the
They do.
things
They all coordinate.
a coordinator should be putting this all together. And the coordinator should have access to these lists, and the coordinator should have access to how to contact these folks or reach emergency responders when there's an emergency like that. So again, the coordinator has to be somebody, in my opinion, who has the background and then the ability to understand this entire process and what they need to do. One of the things that we're asked very often is there a job description, for example, for a coordinator? Yes, there is. Job description for an ADA coordinator is actually extremely extensive and quite detailed. Mass Office on Disability, again, as a good example of what a job description is. I can tell you my job description as the ADA coordinator for the town of Dighton, even though I'm very minimally, involved in terms of hours, that's also because I think I know what I'm doing. But having said that, my job description is probably more extensive than most people in town. And the reason for that is because it really cross matches every department in town. You have to work, I don't care if it's the assessor's office or it's the police department. If it's the fire department, as I said, it could be the building department, could be a complaint that comes to your Board of Selectmen's office. All those things have to be ferreted to the ADA coordinator, and then the ADA coordinator is responsible not just for throwing it to somebody else, but for making sure that whatever is done, whatever the response is compliant. Record keeping. The ADA coordinator is responsible for keeping track of every single complaint that is made to the town that has anything to do with disability. So if a resident has a complaint, let's just say they have a complaint about something in the assessor's office, or they can't read something, or it's not big enough, or if they have a complaint about a sidewalk and cracks on a sidewalk, or parking signs, or they have a complaint because they felt they were discriminated against by a department in town or an employee in the town. The ADA coordinator's responsibility is, first of all, to take the complaint, screen the complaint, advise the person of their rights and responsibilities of the complaint, tell them how the town is going to handle the complaint, how the interview process is going to be done, determine whether or not it's necessary for the town to have an EEO, which is Equal Employment or Equal Opportunity Officer, and how that complaint is going to be handled. Who's going to do the investigative work? Who's going to issue the report? Who's going to send that report to your town administrator? Who's going to then provide it to your Board of Selectmen? And then what's the outcome going to be? Those are all responsibilities of an ADA coordinator, no matter what level the complaint is at. The complaint may not be something from the posting on a wall. It could be somebody who's calling the coordinator and saying, I have a complaint about the way Meg treated me when I was in such and such, because I had a disability and then she told me I couldn't bring my dog in here, and it's a guide dog. Well, it's that coordinator's responsibility to call Meg up and say, listen, a person with a guide dog is allowed to have access to such and such. Now, if it's a different type of dog and they tell you it's a comfort dog, maybe there are certain situations where the comfort dog technically isn't allowed in a building and the person is saying they are. So then the coordinator has to educate the complainant as to whether or not a comfort dog is allowed in certain locations, which they are not, by the way. So they have to know how to handle that information and provide the law. It's not just telling them, it's providing them with the law, the policy, and how it has to be interpreted. So, these are things that are covered in the job description as well. As I said, the job descriptions are very thorough, and it holds them accountable for every single thing that you can think of in a town that covers anything with a disability. I'm going to stop again because I know I'm going on and on and on. And I'm assuming there's at least one question.
So there is a requirement to have an actual job description of the ADA coordinator in the town, like they can't just link it to the Massachusetts Office on Disability. They need
Yeah,
an
there
actual
is,
job
there is,
description.
there is a requirement for every town to have a job description of what a coordinator should be doing. The problem is, as I said, technically, and this is the technical side of it, the state doesn't require that every town have an ADA coordinator. And that's a key factor here. If you have more than 50 employees, as I've discussed, it has to be a person who's considered a town employee. There technically is not a requirement to have an ADA coordinator in the in a town, and that's a really, really sticky point. And the reason I say that's sticky is because if you don't have an ADA coordinator in town and you're relying on a town administrator or the chair of the Board of Selectmen or a police chief or a building commissioner to be the enforcement person for anything ADA, and they're not well versed and they're not trained, there's a lot of room for trouble. There's a lot of room for error, and there's a lot of room for lawsuits. But technically, one of the things I'm involved in through the work that I do as a lobbyist is working with the Commonwealth and identifying state legislators who support the requirements for every city and town in Massachusetts to have an ADA coordinator. Then the question becomes, should that person have to be a volunteer or should they be an employee? And if they're an employee, how many hours should they have based on the numbers of residents in the town? Who's going to pay for it? Where's it going to come from in budgets today? All that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of question around that, but technically there is not a requirement for a town to have a coordinator, unfortunately.
Bud, do we have more than 50 employees? You're on it.
Yeah, we do. Yep.
Thank you.
So let me,
Can I just ask, I think we're on mute, are we still on mute?
No, we're open.
Oh, so it's a required position if you have more than 50 employees, or is?
yes, if you have 50 employees, it's recommended, let me be clear. If you have more than 50 employees, it is recommended that you have an ADA coordinator, but that person has to be an employee of the town. It's always recommended you have a coordinator. The difference is if you have 50 employees or more, then that person has to be an employee of the town.
Okay, thank you.
Silly
that clear?
question, do we have more than 50 employees?
Bud
Yeah.
just said yes.
Okay,
So the answer is if you have more than 50 employees, I'll use that specific. If you have more than 50 employees, then if you have a coordinator, it has to be somebody who is an employee of the town. Whether that person has the prerequisite background, that's not something for me to get into in this conversation or not. I don't know what you have or who you have. So I couldn't address that. But the answer is that person has to be an employee of the town. Does that clarify that? I hope that clarifies it.
So what you're saying is Town of Sandwich does not need to have an ADA coordinator.
Technically, they don't need to have a coordinator, but if they do have a coordinator, which I would highly recommend, it has to be an employee of the town.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. I talked a little bit earlier about the variance process, and if Sandwich is like the town that I live in is an older town, and variance process often comes up when you have older buildings that you want to retrofit or you want to modernize. There are certain things that you have to do to become in compliance, and they're too numerous to go into right now. But there are also a lot of things that you might request variances for. As I said, it could be, in some cases, it could be where doors are located, or it could be access to a stage area, or it could be that, you can get access to, or you can make access to make a restroom larger, for example, but you may not be able to make it have the full turn radius inside the restroom, things like that. Or because of where piping is, or because of where plumbing goes, you may not be able to have the sinks at the exact 30-inch height, for example, things of that nature. And they may have to be moved slightly or off where there's a slight reach to them that otherwise wouldn't exist. The same thing if you're doing a lot of street work. In some cases, you have sewage systems under street with old pipes. And that may mean that your ramps, your down ramps, your braille pad ramps have to go at a slight angle. You certainly don't want them going down into the center of the street. That's going to take somebody out into the middle, but you may have to adjust them slightly to the left or the right of center from the sidewalk point. Or you may not be able to make a sidewalk that meets that minimal 36-inch prerequisite, where some sidewalks have to be 60 inches. You may not be able to meet that again because of the street size or because of where you have property lines or fences, things like that. So some cases you have to ask for variances from the State Architectural Access Board. They're usually pretty good about it, as I noted, but they do require a lot of documentation and background. Variances generally need to be signed off on, not just by the ADA coordinator, but also by the building commissioner of a town or building inspector of a town, whichever person, you know, that title happens to fit, because this is public property. The other things you have to consider for variance access are your outdoor facilities. So if you're building a new park or a playground, or you're redoing a ball field, for example, what about access, not only for parking, but to physically get there? If the ball field is 125 feet away from the parking lot, a wheelchair may not be able to go across the ground. So if you can't afford building a paved walkway to get there, then you have to look at, for example, producing grass mats, which are a different type of surfacing that can be moved. That's one of the things we recommend, I always recommend, is that towns purchase grass mats so that when they have activities that are going on public property, they can be stored somewhere. Maybe it's your recreation department or your highway department, and grass mats can be loaded up onto a truck and then put down on the surface so that from a parking surface, you can have access for a person in the wheelchair or walker to get there that's smooth and that's comfortable. And whether they're self-mobile or somebody is moving them or pushing them or pulling them, they can do it in a safe manner. So those are things that you can do also that you don't have to have a variance for. But if you don't have if you don't do these things and you don't have a variance, you can be in a lot of trouble. Any questions so far? Or should I keep going?
No, I see no questions.
Either I'm boring everybody or I'm just doing really good. I don't know which.
It's a lot of information, but good information.
It's a real lot of information. I'm gonna repeat what I said earlier, that I think it's important for the coordinator. There's so many rules and procedures that a coordinator has to be aware of and has to follow. And there are so many things you can get called in on that I think it's really important for that person to have some background and some training. Or at least if they don't have the background and the training, that I think the town really needs to make sure that they invest in the training for that person. There are a lot of people out there I know who are coordinators who never had a lick of training before they were asked to be a coordinator for a town. And once they started getting the training and they embraced it, they became amazing coordinators, and they still are in many towns that I know of. So, you know, I don't know what Sandwich's situation is completely, but training is always key, and the laws are always changing, and the procedures are always changing. There's a difference, as I said earlier, between state and federal law, and in most cases, Massachusetts law, especially for building code, is tighter than federal law. And Massachusetts is in the process of updating its building code right now for accessibility. And when they finally launch the new code, it's going to be even tighter than it is now. And it's really going to take a lot for a coordinator to understand what's old, what's new, what's grandfathered in, and what's not. So keep that in mind as well. Another thing that I want to touch on is, what do you do when you have emergency processes and procedures and evacuations? And I talked about this a little bit earlier when I talked about the various lists coming together and a coordinator having access or coordinating all the lists. Sandwiches on the Cape, clearly. You potentially could have a large storm that require a lot of evacuation for a whole variety of reasons, whether it's summer or winter. Your evacuation routes have to be clearly defined for families that have a member with disability, as long as you know about them. But you have to have a way. Do you have enough procedure for persons with disability for evacuation process? What's your plan for that? Is there a plan filed with the state right now, with FEMA for emergency management, and with MEMA for emergency management, if you have to evacuate people with disabilities? Do you have enough beds for emergency preparedness? Do you have hospital beds? Do you have wheelchairs? Do you have stretchers for persons with disabilities who are immobile? COVID is a great example of that. During COVID, I worked with a number of towns because, as the coordinator, not only for Dayton, but through the work that I do privately, we had a responsibility to work with, I think we worked with about 17 or 18 towns around the state, making sure that we could get people their COVID vaccinations in home, which basically meant working with the private sector companies who had ambulance services and other services, to have people come in full suit regalia and all suited up so that they could administer COVID vaccinations or other types of vaccinations or medical services to people who are shut-ins. So you want to be aware of that. That's another responsibility that the coordinator has, to make sure that all of those things are done, followed through, and that those things are filed responsibly and timely with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts through MEMA. Is there any other questions so far? Okay, I'm going to stop in a couple minutes because I think I'm going to probably overwhelm people. The self-evaluation plan, which, as I talked about earlier, that I think every town should have. The self-evaluation plan is going to look at all of your buildings, all of your grounds, all of your land, all of your open space, all of your trails, all of your policies, all of your procedures, all of your digital technology, all of your other forms of technology, your hiring practices, your procedures, everything. That's a comprehensive overview plan that looks at everything in the town, looks at what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, recommends what you need to do in the future, and how you're going to mitigate that. The most important part of that isn't what you've done in the past, it's what you need to do going forward. I don't know what Sandwich's financial situation is, but one of the things that happens with a lot of towns is that when they do their self-evaluation, what they realize is, oh, we need to do this, or we need to do A, B, C, D, E for compliance. However, it's going to cost us $60,000 and money we don't have right now. So it allows the town administrator or the mayor or whomever it might be to look at future capital expenses. Most towns have a capital expense committee or project, committee, and they can look at outlay for capital expenses so that they can bring these things into fruition in the future and into compliance. So it doesn't all have to happen at once, and I'm going to reiterate it again. What's important with having a production plan like this is, if you're ever sued by the state, but more importantly, the U.S. Department of Justice, you have to be able to show that you're moving forward. One of my biggest responsibilities for the town of Dighton, as small as we are, and for the work that we do privately in other communities, is to be able to make sure everything we're doing is showing a forward movement, so that if and when the federal government ever came down on us, which they do more and more these days, regardless of the political world we're in now, it's still, regardless, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm just going to say that that happens. It happened in the previous administration, and it's happening now. The Justice Department is becoming more and more involved in what cities and towns are doing to become compliant with the federal ADA law. If they come to you before you get to them, you're in a difficult situation. It is always important to be moving forward. It's very simple to give them a letter that said we're doing A, B, C, and D, and very often they back off. But you've got to be moving forward, and you've got to be showing that you're taking the steps to be compliant. Again, I could keep going, but I think I've answered a lot of the things that most communities want to know and most commissions want to know. The one I will tell you as commission, for all of you, the work that you do is enormous. You have a large number of members on your commission. I've been in commissions where there are only 3 members. There are a lot of commissions where people are only on them because either they have a disability or they have a loved one with a disability. And once that person dies or moves on, then their involvement with the commission ceases to exist. That's just the nature of the beast for volunteer commissions or committees. In your case, you've got a large number of people, which is wonderful to begin with. You're in advisory capacity. However, as an advisory capacity, you have the right to ask for enforcement. You have the right to file complaints if you don't feel enforcement is being met. You have the right to go to your town administrator or whoever the person is designated as your ADA coordinator and ask for policy and procedure to be enforced. You have the right to ask for policy and procedure to be made public. You have the right to even have a voice in that policy and procedure. And I would encourage you as a commission to use that right. I would also encourage whoever is your designated ADA coordinator to be invited to have a seat at your table. They wouldn't be a voting member, and they would be the liaison between you and the town. And that's really important, so that that person has a seat at your table for all the conversations that you're having. They can share what they know. They can learn from you. You can learn from them. It's an educational process, and it has to be an ongoing, continuous process. So you know, when somebody comes to you and has a complaint, you have one of a couple ways you can do it. You can get your backs up, or you can refer to your ADA coordinator and say, you know, Meg, we have a complaint here. You're the ADA coordinator. Can you look into this for us and just advise us? Now, Meg may look into it, and in the end, she may have to be able to tell you we resolve this amicably, but she can't discuss it because it's a private matter. The difference with the coordinator and you guys, partly, as I said earlier, the coordinator can't share with you the complaint that they get or the work that they do with private citizens. As volunteers, you can say and share and do anything you want with anybody. But because that person is in an official capacity in your town as a coordinator, they cannot. So you can bring information to them on specific residents and that might need help. You may have a resident that you know needs help or needs equipment to be found for a wheelchair because they've had a stroke or something like that. I get a lot of calls, even just in the town of Dayton, as the coordinator here. I get calls for a lot of things that technically do not have anything to do with me as a coordinator. People want to know how they can arrange for Mass Health. They want to know how they can get a wheelchair or a walker, or how they can get access perhaps to a device if they have to have, you know, a shot every day or something like that, or they have to be hooked up to a device for blood transfusions, things like that. They want to know about transportation for PT1s, which is medical transportation, or how they can find other services and other resources, disability housing. Those are not official capacities of things that I have to do as the coordinator, but by doing my job as a coordinator, I'm giving the information to them or their family members to give them the tools they need to go out and find those services and those resources. People think that a coordinator is responsible for giving them and doing everything and anything that affects the public. And in a lot of cases, what the public needs is resources and referrals, but there's nothing that a coordinator can do as well. You may want to, as the commission and as the coordinator, there are a lot of things that I want to do at times, but they're not purview to what my responsibility is to the public. So I can give them general information, but I cannot do it in an official capacity representing the town. On the other hand, if somebody calls me and says that they want to put a slow down sign on their street because there are deaf children or blind children, or they want to talk about ways to enforce ticketing people who park in disability spots, I'm all ears and happy to advise, and that is public capacity.
Thanks, Jonathan. Oh, Dom has a question.
Yes, our last survey, town survey was,
2019.
okay, and what would you recommend the time period be between surveys?
3 years.
3 years?
Yes, sir.
So we're due.
One of the things that you can do for a self-assessment, if you haven't done it yet, is the Mass Office on Disability, and perhaps the commission, for example, could work with your town administrator. But one of the things that you can do, there are a couple things. You can go to the Mass Office on Disability. I think their grant process opens in April.
Yeah, we had one last time.
Right. So you could do that. And if you do a really good one and make a really good case, or if you can show that, you know, you want to do A, B, C, D, E, because the first thing is to do your assessment. But if you can get a grant to do your assessment, then you would hire a company to come in and do the assessment for you, as opposed to trying to do the self-assessment yourselves. The company that comes in is going to look at everything you have, all policies, procedures, your land, your physical plants. We look at everything. When we do those, we look at every single thing that a town has. You meet with employees, you conduct interviews with departments, you talk about how they communicate with residents, you talk about physical communication, verbal communication, technology communication, everything gets covered.
That's something that they could reach out to someone to help them with.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
That's when towns reach out to companies like mine and other companies to do that kind of stuff.
Okay.
It's very involved because you're bringing in, you're bringing in planners, in some cases, you're bringing in architectural designers, so that the goal is to give the town a blueprint. In the end, it's not to advise and not to tell them what they have to do. The goal is to give the town a blueprint of what they need to do to move forward to become compliant. But keep in mind that blueprint, you usually, when we do it, for example, we give a 3-year, a 5-year, and a 10-year. So what do you need to do in 3 years? What do you need to do in 5? What do you need to do in 10? What's the cost of different factors? It may be something as simple as, you know, in one building, it could be looking at in doorways, you look at the thresholds. It could be that there are 4 thresholds that need to be lowered. And the cost
Hey,
to do that
Jonathan?
is $1,200. That's part of what we do.
I don't know if we want to move into questions to wrap up because we have a couple business things to cover after. And then, but as an ADA coordinator in a different town, could the town use you as a resource if they had any questions?
Sure. I'm always happy to be a resource. Yes. You have my town email address, I believe, Meg. You could share that with your town administrator or anybody else in the town if you'd like. That's fine.
I think Lisa had shared it with them as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Do we want to move into questions? Is that okay, Jonathan?
Sure.
All right. Does anybody have any particular questions? But we can always reach out to you after as well, right?
You can. I mean, I've given a lot of information. I really have. And I probably
Yep.
overwhelmed. I hope if I put people to sleep, I really apologize.
It's all right, Will. Does anybody have any particular questions for Jonathan? And please, I know that you guys in the town have his information, so if you have questions after, you could ask. I think you talk a lot more than me, Jonathan. I don't know. We're gonna have to have a competition for that.
I'll be happy to
My
let you win.
lights just went off in my car. I need to turn
I'll let
them
you win next time. I have no problem with that.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. Anybody questions? Talk off next time. Next Commission on Disability meeting will be a talk off. I'm kidding. Hold on. All right. Anybody else have questions? No? All right. Thank you so much. And I will
No.
pass out your information. I'm gonna go turn my lights on in my car and
You're
then
welcome. And I'll just thank, I appreciate you all having me. Seriously, if anybody has any questions, whether it's members of your commission or the folks who are on from your town this evening, feel free to get my information from Meg or from, I guess, Lisa, you said has it too, and reach out and I'm happy to answer it. If I cannot answer it, I will direct you to the source where you can get the information. So thank you guys all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
awesome. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bud, could you guys, could we coordinate at some point going forward to have an update from you guys on where you're at in moving forward with compliance?
Sure. There's a lot of things we've done over the last month and are some longer term. And I know 4 department heads met with Mr. Gale for over an hour within the last week or two to get some input and advice on different things we've already implemented on the website and that we'll be looking at in the future. So sure.
All right.
If
Well,
you
I'll
want to schedule an update on an upcoming meeting, you know, depending on the date, you know, we'll
Yeah, I'll work
probably
with you
have
to figure that out.
several people appearing. So
I will just add very quickly that was a very positive meeting. I appreciated the interest and the information that not only we provided, but what the town provided as well. And clearly the town did show an interest in doing what you need to do to move forward for the areas that we discussed. I think that was a very positive conversation.
Awesome. I'd love to hear that.
yeah, and I think it was very helpful from our perspective, Meg, when you and others clarified that your primary goal was, you know, digital accessibility and equity. So that's what we've been focusing on mostly for the last month or so. So, you know, that was helpful.
Yeah, and you guys have digital equity money too, right? From the digital equity grant. I know some of that got frozen or whatever, didn't come through, but you do have some funding from that you can use, I think.
Yeah, we've, you know, a couple of things we went for grants for previously through the IT department. Thankfully, the price on a couple of those things has come down significantly. So we were already able to purchase one of those tools that's now up on the website to help with accessibility and equity. And, you know, we're looking at further, and the company that does our website does the vast majority in the state and even in the country. And I think they're well aware of that deadline that's coming up in, you know, mid 2027. And there's a lot of things that they're going to be doing behind the scenes to look at how we can improve things. So I think you'll see like constantly chipping away at some of the things on our website. And I know the town clerk's office worked with, you and Joe to provide some, you know, different ways to post the agenda. So I think we want to try it with you guys for a while first, and if it's successful, then try to roll it out with all the boards and committees. So
That'd be great. Yeah, so I'll reach out to you in the near future to figure out an update. I
good.
know we have the next 2 months are actually kind of a lot of things going on. So,
Okay.
but thank you.
And I should stress, like, I don't know if you need me to go around the table, but there's town manager's office, the board of selectmen, the building commissioner / ADA coordinator, the HR director. Previously, the community development director was on. Tim in the bottom right, at least on our screen, is from the IT department. And I saw Taylor popped on 1 or 2 times when he was able to from the town clerk's office. So
I think for a long time, all we've really wanted to do is work with you guys and have a seat at the table and have you guys have a seat at our table so that we can work collaboratively to do that. And I think to meet the expectations of people with disabilities in our community, involving them in the decision-making process is really important. So I'm glad to see that you're here and that you're including us. And that we can have that seat, because we would rather tell you ahead of time what we need or what our expectations are, instead of having you guys guess what that is and try to do it and fail not because you didn't try, but because we didn't have that collaboration. I think it will help both of us moving forward.
And I would say too, we have a lot of faith and support of Ian and his role. I know he's taking it seriously, and I know he's looking forward to additional training, as Mr. Gale pointed out. And it has to be said that his physical knowledge of what's required in buildings is beyond anyone. So at least in that component of accessibility, like, it's really critical, and we have the right person for that. And it's telling that depending on what the issue is, we always reach out to the appropriate department who would know it best to help us find a solution. So that's been positive. So we look forward to trying to continue to implement things, and we're trying to put together a list as well as all the things that have been done over the last several years. I forget who said it, but I like that whole concept of you chip away a little bit at a time, and before you know it, you've made some real progress. And I think that's pretty telling. And I know sometimes people get frustrated in the cost of some of these projects, especially the bigger building ones. It is quite staggering lately. So, but we've made a lot of progress. So
yeah, we would love to hear an update from the ADA coordinator on what I think you're in there, Ian, what you're learning to be able to support us. Because we want, there are towns that, you might not have that digital accessibility training, but it's available. And for us to know that you are getting that would make us feel better. So any updates that you can provide on the training and what you guys are doing regularly will build trust between both of us.
And I would just add, because none of us are IT experts except for Tim. We asked Tim to be involved because of his knowledge base, and frankly, he's younger than all of us and knows some of the tools that we can use better. And he immediately reached out, and I would say has made more progress with our website in a matter of weeks than we have in years of trying to get them to come to the table previously. And some of that may be that the company realizes every one of their clients has to be in compliance within a few years. So
a lot of them are scrambling, and I think it's important that even Tim gets the training to be able to use the language and know the accessibility language in order to convey that to them. So it would be great, because I'm IT and accessibility, right? That's what I do IT for a living too. But that accessibility component, I know minimal about that, but it's important for me that I'm learning those things so that I can bridge that gap. But most IT people don't have accessibility training. So providing him with that would be important, would be useful for you and us.
I don't know, it's probably better if we explain some of these things when we come back, but
Sure.
if you ever needed a quick update on at least the website stuff, I know we could do that, so.
Yeah, if you want to shoot us one via email and I can read it if you can't come, but we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Anybody else? Thank you. I appreciate it, bud. Anybody else?
It's Kelly. Ian, are you gonna come to our meetings going forward? I just thought it was helpful when Brendan used to come.
Well, I'm gonna get unmuted.
I think that's the plan. They will, provide updates probably monthly. And, as I said, Bud said, there's a lot of moving parts right now, and we're working on a lot of things. And I think it's benefits everybody if I can go out monthly and provide a specific update. And I think sometimes we're doing a lot behind the scenes, and the commission might not be aware of it. But I think if I can be part of it and provide updates on a regular basis, I think it'll help everybody.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
I think if you guys go on our website, a couple of the specific things that we've done recently, and I forget the name of the program. Yeah, Audio Eye. So at the bottom right, there's now an icon that if you clicked on, it allows you to manipulate all sorts of stuff on visually how the website comes across. So it should be able to help people depending on what their visual impairments are. And then based on feedback.
Is that one of the overlay things? Then Jonathan, do you recommend those?
It is.
So to answer your question, is Audio Eyes is a very good program for
Okay,
certain
thank
types
you.
of things. They work, and that's one of the ones that when we met with the town a couple weeks ago, we discussed enhancing through Audio Eyes. So I'm glad to see that you're doing that. That does a lot to enhance the way the print looks and the way it can be maneuvered and so forth. It also does help to some extent with the audio side of it for people who use screen readers such as JAWS or NBDNA, things like that. So it does have some ability to help with some of that as well, yes. Is it perfect? No, but I'm going to say that there is nothing out there that is perfect. It's better than most.
Awesome.
And we reconfigured the layout on the main page, and I'll let Tim explain it, but just, I know one of you remarked whenever you would use your, special features so you could try to see and understand what's on the website, you would have to tab, like, I think it was literally a dozen or 15 times to
Yeah,
get
it
to the
has to
search
skip to
bar.
content. You have
Yeah,
that
so
up.
that's now all been reconfigured, so I think by the 4th or 5th tab, you get to the search bar first. There's certain things at the top of the website, there's no way we can change, so we can't get it to like number 1 or 2, so.
Awesome.
But Tim can explain that better if it would help.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me right now.
We can.
Okay, sorry. For being the IT expert, my Zoom keeps freezing on me, so we're doing good. But yeah, no, nice to meet everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. Like you said, Meg, we know a lot about IT, but the accessibility realm is new to me, so I'm just, diving in here, just trying to figure everything out as we go along. But yeah, so like Bud mentioned, we moved the search bar to try to get there quicker for folks. We've got the Audio Eyes plugin, and there's going to be a lot more stuff on top of that that I'm focusing on right now. I think a big part of it's going to be staff training too, because I can make changes on the website, but we need to get everybody in a universal mindset on how we post things. Like the news flashes that go out, trying to make them as readable as possible, making sure we use proper alt text on images, and stuff like that. So I'm all ears for suggestions, and I think there's going to be a lot of good changes coming down the line. But every day we're trying to make some kind of improvement to make the website easier to access.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to be taking IT accessibility training. That's one of my focuses I'm going to do. So feel free if you need to bounce something off of me as a fellow IT person. We never know everything. We just have to know our resources. So I'm happy to help you at any time. You can reach out.
I appreciate it. Yeah, and I'd like to even take the training as well. I don't know if there's a certain source that is the recommended source to go to for that.
There's a few. I'll reach out to you and let you know the different things that I'm taking. I'm happy to share that information.
Sure, yeah, that would be great. Because there's a lot to know, so it definitely would be helpful to have for sure.
Tim, I know you met with Min before, when you met with Min and I also, and I can ask Min to send you some information on training resources as well.
She's
Okay.
my training resource person, so you'll get the same
Perfect.
good info.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I would I'd appreciate that. And again, thank you to Jonathan too for spending that time with us last week and trying to get us up to speed a little bit. So
Appreciate
all
it.
good. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we got a couple quick things on our agenda that are left, but thank you, everyone. I know you guys worked a long day. And so
Okay.
thank you for coming and listening to Jonathan and taking that information and making progress moving forward. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks again for having me. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, go on.
All right, let's see if we can, does someone want to make a motion to appoint Don as a new member? I need him.
I make the motion to promote Dawn as a new member.
A second.
And we'll take a roll call vote. Yes. Kelly,
Yes.
Dom. I'm gonna
Yes.
have, you guys are gonna have to have nicknames. Your names are too close. Joanne,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
and Janine. I think that's all
Yes.
here. Awesome. Unanimously, I will follow up with you. If you could write the Board of Selectmen like a, what do you want a recommendation and like a summary of what he does? Is that what you want? And yes, that's muted. Sorry.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So I'll reach out to you, Don, just to get all the information and make the recommendation, but they just want to have a couple quick sentences about who you are. I know you talked about it last meeting, but they just want it for the Board of Selectmen meeting. Do you guys need any other information? He falls under the requirements of being on the board.
Right.
Quick question while we're here, and this may be for Shane and Charlie. We have somebody that's interested that's a non-resident, and my understanding is non-residents usually don't make it through the Board of Selectmen. I just want to, but there's
Yeah, I
no
think-
official thing.
Yeah, I don't think I would say that's a no.
Right, I don't
Okay.
think that's appropriate, Meg.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what, no, I mean, I got the thing and I'm like, doesn't he have to live in Sandwich? And we wanted to make sure. So since I had you, thank you for clarifying. Okay, and then the other thing is I got accepted through, not through the channel of being, did you get my email on this, Bud? About
I
the,
did. Yeah, I thought I was copied on it. It was, I think, yeah.
do you have any issues? So I'm
I don't
accepted
think
into
so.
the.
It's just a program at 4Cs, right? And
Yep, so there's a digital, oh my God, I need to read because it's too late. The Cape Cod Community College Equity Leaders Program. And what they do is people who are leaders in different types of equity, they have a free program. I got accepted into it. I let them know that I was on the Commission on Disability and wondered if I should be in the municipal section. But if I go as the chair of the Commission on Disability, I would want your approval for me to do that. Otherwise, I'll go in under another thing. So does someone want to make a motion for me to go in to that as a representative of the Commission on Disability? Is that the right way to go about that, Bud?
yeah, I think that'd be fine.
Okay. Does someone want to make a motion to have me be the representative for the Sandwich Commission on Disability?
I'll make a motion for Meg to represent us as Commission of Disabilities at the Cape Cod Community College.
I second.
All right, roll call. Yes, from me, Kelly,
Yes.
Dom Jellison,
Aye.
Joanne,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Janine. Are you there, Janine?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was coughing. Yes.
Awesome. Passes. So I will do that and I'll report back to you. It's going to be super fun. I'm very excited about it. And then we can leave the minutes to go to the next time. But I want to tell everyone that I've been talking to the Cape Cod Commission, and they are taking public comment on transit, people who use public transit. And so anybody that wants, I'm going to invite them to take public comment and from us and anybody that uses that from a disability perspective, to have feedback on it. So next time, they're going to come to the next meeting. So just so you guys all know that. Does someone want a motion to close this meeting?
I'll make a motion to close the meeting.
Close.
All right, all in favor, we can do voice for this one or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Woo, that was a long one. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Thank
Have a
you.
great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meg.
Bye.